The wind that swept down from the Bighorn Mountains did not just blow, it scoured. It carried the grit of 3 territories and the biting promise of a winter that was arriving too early and with too much cruelty. For Emma Price. The wind was a physical weight against her shoulders, pressing her deeper into the seat of the buckboard wagon that had been her only home for nearly a month. Around her, the Wyoming territory stretched out in an endless, indifferent canvas of gray and brown. The sagebrush, brittle and dry, shivered against the hard earth. Above, the sky was a slate ceiling, heavy and low, sealing them in. There was no sun, only a flat, diffused light that offered no warmth. Emma tightened her grip on the leather reins. Her gloves were thin wool, worn through at the thumbs, and beneath them, her hands were raw and blistered. Every jerk of the horse's head, every shudder of the wagon wheels over the rutted trail, sent a fresh shock of pain through her knuckles. But she did not loosen her grip. To let go was to stop, and to stop out here, in this vast emptiness between civilization and silence, was to die. Beside her, huddled under a patchwork quilt that had seen better days in a happier life, sat her son, Caleb, 7 years old, yet he looked smaller, shrunken by the cold and the scarcity of food. He coughed, a dry, hacking sound that rattled in his chest and tore at Emma's heart. "Are you warm enough, Caleb?" Emma asked, her voice cracking in the dry air. She did not look at him, keeping her eyes fixed on the ears of their horse, a tired mare named Bess who was losing the will to fight the wind. Caleb shifted, pulling the quilt up to his nose. "I am fine. Mama, are we almost to the town?" Emma swallowed the lie before it could reach her lips. She had been telling him soon for 3 days. Soon, they would find a warm bed. Soon, they would eat fresh bread. Soon, the fear that sat in the base of her throat like a stone would dissolve. "We are getting there," she said instead, trying to infuse her tone with a confidence she did not feel. "Red Bluff is just ahead. Another day, maybe 2. 2 days might as well have been a lifetime." In her pocket, Emma felt the phantom weight of the wedding ring she had sold in the last settlement, a dusty collection of shacks east of the Powder River. The pawnbroker, a man with yellow eyes and hands that shook, had given her $10 for it. $10 for 5 years of marriage, for the memory of a man who had promised to love her and then left her to rot in a tenement while he chased whiskey and cards. $10 bought grain for Bess, dried beef, and a sack of flour. It bought them time, but time was running out faster than the road. The wind picked up, howling like a wounded animal. The temperature began to drop with terrifying speed. Emma watched as the first flakes of snow began to fall. They were not soft, drifting flakes. They were hard pellets of ice, driving sideways, stinging her face like buckshot. Within an hour, the world transformed. The gray prairie vanished behind a curtain of white. The trail, already faint, disappeared entirely under the accumulating drifts. Bess slowed, her head bowing against the onslaught. "Come on, old girl," Emma urged, snapping the reins. "We cannot stop here." But the snow was relentless. It piled against the wheels, clogging the spokes. The wagon lurched violently to the left as the front wheel found a deep, hidden rut in the frozen mud. There was a sickening crack, loud as a rifle shot. The wagon pitched sideways. Emma threw her arm out to catch Caleb as the world tilted. The buckboard slammed into the earth, listing heavily. Bess whinnied in panic, thrashing in the traces, but the wagon did not move. Emma scrambled to regain her balance, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Caleb, I am okay. Mama," Caleb whimpered, though his eyes were wide with terror. Emma climbed down, her boots sinking into calf-deep snow. She fought her way to the front of the wagon. The left front wheel was shattered. The spokes splintered like kindling. The axle was buried in the mud. She stood there for a long moment, the wind tearing at her bonnet, looking at the wreckage. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to seize her. They were stranded. They were miles from anywhere, in a blizzard, with no shelter and a broken wagon. She looked at Bess. The horse was shivering, coat matted with ice. She looked at the wagon, filled with the meager sum of their earthly possessions, a trunk of clothes, a few books, a cast-iron skillet. "We have to walk," Emma said aloud, the words snatched away by the gale. She returned to the seat and grabbed Caleb, pulling him into her arms. He felt dangerously light, his body trembling violently. "We are walking?" Caleb asked, his teeth chattering. "Yes, baby. We have to find a place to sleep." She grabbed the thickest blanket, wrapping it around him and tying it securely with a length of rope. She took nothing else. The trunk, the clothes, the memories of her life before. It all had to stay. It was dead weight now. Emma took Bess's reins and tried to lead the horse, but the mare refused to move, planting her hooves in the snow, head hanging low. The animal was done. Emma looked into the horse's dark eyes and saw the resignation there. "I'm sorry," Emma whispered, pressing her forehead against the horse's cold nose. "I am so sorry." She unbuckled the traces, setting the horse free. Though she knew Bess would likely just stand there until the cold took her, there was no mercy in this land. Emma turned her back on the wagon and the horse and began to walk. She had no direction, only the vague memory of the trail heading west. She put her head down, shielding Caleb's face with her own body. The snow was blinding now, a swirling vortex of white that erased the horizon. Every step was a battle. The snow clung to her skirts, freezing into heavy bells of ice that dragged at her legs. Her boots, cheap leather with holes in the soles, filled with freezing slush. 1 hour passed, then 2. The cold was no longer a pain. It was a numbness that started in her toes and fingers and crept inward, seeking her heart. She could not feel her feet hitting the ground. She moved on instinct, a primitive drive to keep the child in her arms alive. "Mama, I am sleepy," Caleb mumbled, his voice thick and slow. "No, Caleb." Emma shook him, her own movement sluggish. "You stay awake. You talk to me. Tell me about the book we read. Tell me about the pirate ship." Caleb did not answer. His head lolled against her shoulder. Emma stumbled. She fell to her knees, the snow rushing up to meet her. It looked soft. It looked like a bed. It would be so easy to lie down. Just for a moment, just to rest her eyes. "Get up." The voice in her head sounded like her father, a hard man who had died poor. "Get up, Emma. If you lie down, the boy dies." She forced herself up. She screamed into the wind, a raw, animal sound of defiance. But the wind swallowed it whole. Then she saw it. It was faint, a mere pinprick of yellow in the swirling gray dark. A light. It bobbed and weaved, disappearing and reappearing through the sheets of snow. Emma blinked, wiping ice from her eyelashes. It was not a star. It was too low. It was a lantern. Hope, hot and painful, surged through her blood, waking her nerves with stinging agony. She adjusted Caleb's weight and moved toward the light. She did not know how long she walked. Time had lost its meaning. There was only the white, the wind, and that tiny yellow beacon. Suddenly, a shape loomed out of the darkness. It was a fence line. Then, the dark, towering bulk of a barn. And finally, the house. It was massive, a sprawling structure of timber and stone that seemed to grow out of the earth itself. Light spilled from the windows, cutting golden squares into the snow. The wind tore at the eaves, making the house groan, but it stood solid, an island in the storm. A sign swung from a post near the porch, half buried in a drift. Emma squinted at the letters burnt into the wood. Hale Ranch. The name triggered a memory, a whisper she had heard in a dry goods store in Nebraska. Jonas Hale. Stay clear of his land. He owns the water, he owns the law, and he has a graveyard full of men who trespassed. Fear spiked in her chest, warring with the cold. This was the home of a monster, but as the wind ripped through her thin coat, she knew she had no choice. A monster was better than the freezing death waiting in the dark. She stumbled up the steps, her boots loud on the wooden planks. She reached the heavy oak door and pounded on it with her fist. Her hand felt like a block of wood. She could not feel the impact. "Open up!" she screamed, her voice ragged. Please, nothing happened. She pounded again, harder, desperation lending her strength. The door swung inward with a groan of iron hinges. A blast of warmth hit her, smelling of wood smoke and coffee. A man stood there, but he was not the monster she expected. He was older, with a gray beard and a face weathered like old saddle leather. He held a lantern, his eyes widening as he looked at her. "Good Lord," the man breathed. "Jonas! Jonas! Get out here!" The older man, Luke, she would later learn, reached out to steady her, but she shrank back, clutching Caleb tighter. Then, footsteps, heavy and deliberate, approached from the shadows of the house. A second man stepped into the light. He was tall, towering over the older man. He wore a canvas duster that was frayed at the hem and stained with the dust of 1,000 miles. His shoulders were broad, filling the frame of the doorway, but it was his face that stopped Emma's breath. It was a hard face, comprised of sharp angles and rough planes, clean-shaven but for the shadow of a day's growth. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, disappearing into his hairline. His eyes were the color of gunmetal, cold and assessing, devoid of any welcoming warmth. They were the eyes of a man who had seen everything the world could take from a person and had decided to stop giving. Jonas Hale looked at her. He looked at the snow caked on her skirt, the lack of a wagon, the unconscious boy in her arms. He did not speak. He merely watched, waiting. Emma tried to stand straighter. She needed to speak, but her jaw was frozen. She forced her mouth to work. "Can I stay for the night?" she whispered. It was a begging. She hated it. She hated the weakness in her voice, the way she stood shivering on his porch like a stray dog. But for Caleb, she would beg. She would crawl. Jonas Hale's gaze dropped to Caleb. He saw the boy's blue lips, the way the small hands were clenched into fists in the fabric of Emma's coat. A flicker of something passed behind his steel-gray eyes. Not pity, but recognition. Acknowledgement of a pain he knew well. He looked back at the storm raging behind her, a wall of death that she had just walked out of. He looked at the darkness where her wagon should have been. He knew, with a cattleman's pragmatism, that turning them away was a death sentence. The ranch hands behind him were silent, watching. The air crackled with tension. Jonas was not known for charity. Finally, Jonas spoke. His voice was a low rumble, deep and resonating in his chest. "Stay," he said. Emma let out a breath she didn't know she was holding, her knees buckling slightly with relief. "But you are not leaving after," Jonas added. The words hung in the air, heavier than the snow. They were final, absolute. Emma looked up at him, startled. She searched his face for a jest, a hint of sarcasm, but there was none. He meant it. It sounded like a sentence, or a claim. The older man, Luke, shifted uncomfortably, exchanging a glance with a younger cowboy in the hallway. They knew Jonas Hale better than anyone, and yet they looked surprised. Emma felt a new kind of fear curl in her stomach, different from the fear of the storm. This was the fear of the trap, but then Caleb moaned against her neck, a weak, pitiful sound. "Thank you," Emma managed to say, stepping across the threshold. Jonas did not move aside immediately. For a second, they were inches apart. She smelled tobacco and rain and horse on him. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable, before turning on his heel. "Luke, get the door," Jonas commanded, walking back into the house without looking back. "Marta, bring blankets. And soup." The door slammed shut, cutting off the wind. The silence that followed was ringing and absolute. Emma stood in the entryway, water pooling around her boots as the snow on her coat began to melt. She looked around the great room. It was magnificent and desolate all at once. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, the flames roaring and casting dancing shadows on the high, beamed ceiling. Mounted heads of elk and buffalo stared down with glass eyes. But beneath the grandeur, there was neglect. Dust coated the mantelpiece. The curtains, once a rich velvet, were faded and drawn. In the corner sat a rocking chair, still and empty, with a layer of grime in the crevices of the wood. It was a house that had stopped living a long time ago, even if people still existed inside it. "Here, miss, give me the boy." A woman bustled forward. This was Marta. She was short and round, with a face like a dried apple and eyes that held a strict kindness. She reached for Caleb. Emma flinched, pulling away. "I have him." Marta stopped, hands on her hips. "You are half dead. Child, you are going to drop him. Let me take him to the fire. I promise I will not break him." Emma hesitated, then nodded. She allowed Marta to take Caleb. The loss of his warmth against her chest made her shiver violently. "Come on," Marta ordered. "By the fire, both of you." Emma followed her into the main room. She sat on a rough-hewn bench near the hearth, the heat prickling her frozen skin. It hurt as the blood began to flow back into her extremities, a stinging, burning sensation that made her gasp. Marta stripped the wet blankets off Caleb and wrapped him in thick wool furs. She rubbed his hands and feet briskly. Jonas stood by the window, his back to them, looking out at the storm. He seemed to fill the room even when he was not speaking. Luke entered from the kitchen, carrying 2 bowls of steaming broth. He handed one to Emma. "Drink," he said gently. "It is beef broth. It will help." Emma lifted the bowl with trembling hands. She took a sip. The salt and heat exploded on her tongue. The best thing she had ever tasted. She fed a spoonful to Caleb, who swallowed groggily. Jonas turned from the window. He walked to the fireplace and stood there, one arm resting on the mantel, looking down at them. The firelight cast his face in harsh relief, deepening the shadows under his eyes. "Where are you from?" he asked. His tone was not conversational. It was an interrogation. "East," Emma said, her voice raspy. "Missouri. Originally. Husband?" Emma focused on the soup. "He is gone. Dead?" Jonas asked. Emma hesitated. To say yes was a lie. To say no invited questions she could not answer. "He is not with us," she said carefully. "It is just me and the boy." Jonas watched her. She felt his gaze dissecting her, peeling back the layers of her evasion. He saw the bruises she hid under her high collar, the way she flinched when the wood in the fire popped. He knew she was running. In the West, everyone was running from something. The law, a debt, a memory. "Where were you headed?" Jonas asked. "Red Bluff." Emma said, "I heard there was work, a laundry." Jonas made a sound in his throat, a cynical grunt. "There is no laundry in Red Bluff. Just a saloon and a general store. You would have starved." Emma lifted her chin. "I am a good worker. I would have found something." "In a blizzard? With a broken wagon?" Jonas asked. Emma looked at him sharply. "How did you know the wagon was broken?" "I saw the tracks before the snow covered them," Jonas said. "Or the lack of them. You were walking. No one walks unless the wheels are gone or the horse is dead." Emma looked down. "The horse. Bess. She is still out there. I had to leave her." Jonas looked at Luke. "I will take the team out in the morning," Luke said quietly. "If she is alive, we will bring her in." Emma felt a lump rise in her throat. "Thank you. Do not thank me yet," Jonas said. He moved away from the fire, pacing the room with a restless energy. "The storm is going to last 3 days, maybe 4. The drifts will be 10 feet deep in the passes. You are stuck here." Emma nodded. "I understand. I can work. I can cook. Or clean. I do not want charity." Jonas stopped pacing. He looked at the dusty rocking chair in the corner, his expression tightening for a fraction of a second before becoming impassive again. "We have a cook," he said, nodding at Marta. "But we will see." He looked at Caleb, who was now sleeping soundly, color returning to his cheeks. "What is his name?" Jonas asked. "Caleb. And you?" "Emma. Emma Price. Jonas Hale." He said, "I know." Emma said. Jonas raised an eyebrow. "You know the name? I have heard it spoken." Emma admitted. "Then you know I do not take in guests." Jonas said. Emma met his gaze. The story said he was a killer. The story said he was heartless. But she looked at the man who had let them in, the man who had ordered soup and blankets, the man who was going to send a team for her dying horse. "I know you opened the door," Emma said softly. Jonas held her gaze for a long moment. The silence stretched, filled with the crackle of the fire and the howling wind outside. "Marta," Jonas said, breaking the spell, Put them in the blue room. Marta looked surprised. The blue room? But Jonas, that is, put them in the blue room, Jonas repeated, his voice leaving no room for argument. Yes, Jonas, Marta said. She turned to Emma. Come, child, I will show you. Emma stood, her legs wobbling. She picked up Caleb, though her arms burned with exhaustion. I can carry him, Luke offered. No, Emma said. I have him. She followed Marta up the wide wooden staircase. At the top of the landing, she looked back. Jonas was standing by the fire again, staring into the flames. He looked solitary, like a stone pillar in a desert. The blue room was at the end of the hall. It was small but comfortable, with a sturdy iron bed and a washstand. The wallpaper was a faded floral pattern, peeling slightly at the corners. Marta turned down the covers. Sleep, she said. Do not worry about the morning. The morning will come whether you worry or not. Marta left, closing the door softly. Emma stripped Caleb of his outer clothes and tucked him under the heavy quilt. She crawled in beside him, her body aching in every joint. She lay in the dark, listening to the house. It groaned and creaked under the assault of the wind. She heard the distant lowing of cattle, a mournful sound in the night. She thought about the road. She thought about the cold that had almost taken them, but mostly, she thought about the man downstairs. Stay, but you are not leaving after... The words echoed in her mind. What did he mean? Did he mean to keep her as a servant? A prisoner? Or was it something else? She remembered the look in his eyes when he saw Caleb. It was not the look of a tyrant. It was the look of a man who was starving. Looking at a loaf of bread he knew he could not eat. She touched the spot on her arm where Jonas's coat had brushed hers in the doorway. She felt a strange flutter in her chest, a mixture of fear and a dark, compelling curiosity. She was safe from the storm, safe from the cold, but as she drifted into a restless sleep, Emma realized she had walked out of one danger and straight into another. She was in the lion's den now, and the lion had told her she was never leaving. The morning arrived without the sun. When Emma Price opened her eyes, the room was steeped in a strange, milky luminescence. She sat up, shivering as the quilt slipped from her shoulders, and looked toward the window. There was no glass to be seen, only a solid, pressed wall of white where the snow had drifted high against the house during the night. The silence was absolute, a heavy, muffled weight that pressed against her ears. She swung her legs out of bed, her feet finding the braided rug, and quickly dressed in her wrinkled woolen dress. Caleb was still asleep, a small mound under the heavy furs, his breathing even and quiet for the first time in weeks. She paused to brush a stray lock of hair from his forehead, her hand lingering on his warm skin. He was safe. For now, he was safe. Emma went downstairs. The house was cold, save for the kitchen where the great cast-iron stove radiated heat. Marta was there, kneading dough with rhythmic, powerful thrusts of her floured arms. Jonas Hale sat at the heavy oak table, a tin cup of coffee steaming near his hand. He did not look up when Emma entered. "Good morning," Emma said, her voice sounding small in the cavernous room. Jonas took a slow sip of his coffee before setting it down. Morning. Emma moved to the window near the back door. She scraped a small circle in the frost on the glass and looked out. Her heart plummeted into her stomach. The world was gone. The barn, the corrals, the fences. Everything was buried under a landscape of sculpted ice and snow. The drifts looked to be 4 feet deep in the flat. And who knew how deep against the structures? "My wagon," Emma whispered. "Gone," Jonas said flatly. "Buried. The wheel was broken anyway. You are not going anywhere in that." Emma turned to face him. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The road to Red Bluff might as well be on the moon. "How long?" she asked. Jonas looked at her then, his gray eyes unyielding. "Weeks, maybe a month. The pass gets blocked tight. Even if we could dig out the wagon, a horse cannot pull through this. And you cannot walk it. You would freeze before you made the first mile marker." Panic flared in Emma's chest, hot and sharp. She felt the walls of the kitchen closing in. She had fled Samuel to be free, to be independent, not to be trapped in a stranger's house in the middle of a frozen wasteland. "I cannot stay here for a month," she said, her voice rising slightly. "I have no money to pay you for board. I have nothing." "I know," Jonas said. He stood up, and the sheer size of him seemed to shrink the room. He walked over to the stove and poured more coffee, his movements deliberate. "I am not running a charity, Mrs. Price, and I do not take guests, but I am not going to throw a woman and a child out into a blizzard to die. That is not how we do things." "Then what do you want?" Emma asked, bracing herself. She remembered Samuel's bartering, how everything with him came with a hidden cost, usually paid in pain or submission. Jonas turned, leaning his hip against the counter. "You need a roof. I need help. Marta is getting old, and she cannot manage the house and the cooking for 12 men by herself." "You can cook." "I can," Emma said. "You can mend, sew buttons, wash linens." "Yes." Jonas nodded once, as if closing a cattle deal. "Then that is the arrangement. You work, you help Marta, you keep the house. In exchange, you and the boy get a warm room and 3 meals a day until the thaw comes." Emma looked at him, searching for the trap. It seemed too simple, yet the power imbalance made her skin crawl. She was destitute. He was a king in his own domain. If she agreed, she was essentially his servant, dependent on his whim for survival. She looked over at Marta, who was watching her with a guarded expression. Then she thought of Caleb upstairs, warm and sleeping. She thought of the wind howling outside, the kind of cold that stopped the heart. "I have conditions," Emma said, her voice trembling but her chin high. Marta's hands stopped moving in the dough. Jonas's eyes narrowed slightly, a spark of surprise cutting through his stoicism. "Conditions?" he repeated softly. "I am not a slave," Emma said, clutching her hands together to hide their shaking. "And I am not a servant you can order about at all hours. I will work hard. I will earn our keep. But I want Sundays off to be with my son and to teach him his letters. And—" She swallowed hard, forcing the next words out. "And I want wages, small ones. But if I am working, I want to be paid. I need to save for when the road opens. I will not leave here with nothing in my pockets." The room was silent. The fire popped in the stove. Jonas studied her, his gaze traveling from her frayed collar to her clenched hands, and finally to her eyes. He saw the fear there, but he also saw the steel. She was terrified of him, yet she stood her ground. Most people did not stand their ground against Jonas Hale. $5 a month. Jonas said, "And Sundays are yours, provided the morning meal is on the table before you stop." Emma let out a breath she felt she'd been holding since she walked in. "Agreed." Jonas drained his coffee cup and set it down with a sharp clink. "Agreed. Now, help Marta with the biscuits. The boys will be in for breakfast in 20 minutes. And they eat like wolves." Thus began the life Emma Price never expected to live. Her day started before the dawn. She would wake in the dark, the air in the bedroom so cold that her breath plumed in gray clouds. She would wash her face in the basin, breaking a thin layer of ice on the water, the sting of it acting as a harsh wake-up call. Her hands, already rough, grew red and chapped from the lye soap and the constant scrubbing. The rhythm of the ranch was brutal and unceasing. The house was the heart of the operation, but it was a hard, beating heart. Every morning, the back door would bang open, and the cowboys would file in, bringing with them the smell of wet wool, horse sweat, and the sharp, metallic tang of the winter air. They were a rough lot, men shaped by wind and solitude. They ate quickly, heads down, shoveling eggs and salt pork into their mouths as if fearing the food would be snatched away. At first, they ignored Emma, treating her like a piece of furniture that had suddenly appeared. But as the days turned into a week, the silence shifted into something else. Emma could feel their eyes on her as she poured coffee. She heard the sudden cessation of talk when she entered the room. They were curious, and in the isolated world of the territory, curiosity often bred suspicion. One morning, while scrubbing the floor in the hallway, she heard 2 of the hands talking in the mudroom. "Pretty thing," one voice said. too pretty to be drifting alone. Widow, the other said. That is what Luke says. Widow my foot, the first voice scoffed. I've seen her kind in Cheyenne, run off from a husband, likely. Or maybe she is one of those soiled doves looking to retire. Why else would the boss take her in? Emma froze, the scrub brush dripping in her hand. Soiled dove. The term burned her ears. It was the polite way of saying whore. She scrubbed harder, the bristles tearing at the wood, tears pricking her eyes. She wanted to run out and scream at them, to tell them she was a mother, that she had fought tooth and nail to keep her dignity. But she bit her lip until it tasted of iron. She could not afford a scene. She needed this roof. She focused her world on Caleb. He was resilient, as children often are. He followed her around the kitchen, sitting on a stool while she peeled potatoes, reading from the one tattered primer she had saved. He befriended Marta, who, despite her gruff exterior, began slipping him extra pieces of dried apple and letting him lick the spoon after she made cornbread. But the sanctuary of the kitchen was not impenetrable. 10 days into their stay, the tension that had been simmering finally boiled over. Breakfast was ending. Most of the men had filed out to saddle their horses, bracing for another day of digging cattle out of drifts. A few lingered over their coffee. Among them was Eddie, a young man with a thin face and eyes that moved too fast. He had been watching Emma for days, his gaze lingering on her waist, her neck. Emma reached across the table to clear a platter. Eddie reached out and caught her wrist. His hand was greasy from the bacon. "You are awful quiet, darlin'," Eddie said, a smirk playing on his lips. "Don't you have a smile for us? It is cold out there. A man could use a little warmth." Emma pulled her hand back, but his grip was tight. "Please let go," she said, her voice low. Eddie laughed, looking at the other men for validation. "Just asking for a smile? Unless you charge for that, too? Is that how you paid for your room upstairs?" The insult hung in the air, gross and heavy. Caleb, sitting in the corner with his book, looked up, his eyes wide. "Let go of me," Emma said, panic rising. "Or what?" Eddie sneered. "You going to cry to the—" The door to the office opened. It was not a loud sound, but it cut through the noise of the kitchen like a knife. Jonas stood there. He was wearing his coat, ready to ride out. He held his gloves in one hand. He did not look angry. He looked bored, which was infinitely more terrifying. "Let her go. Eddie," Jonas said. The voice was not loud. It was conversant, calm, and utterly deadly. Eddie's smile faltered. He dropped Emma's wrist as if it were a hot coal. "Just having some fun. Boss, she is too serious." Jonas walked into the room. His boot struck the floorboards with a heavy, rhythmic thud. He stopped 3 feet from Eddie. He looked at the grease on Emma's wrist, then at Caleb's frightened face, and finally settled his gaze on Eddie. "Fun," Jonas repeated. "Yeah, just a joke." Jonas stared at him. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. The other men looked down at their cups, unwilling to meet Jonas's eyes. Jonas's right hand drifted down, not to his gun, but to his belt, resting there near the holster. It was a casual movement, yet it carried the weight of a thunderhead. "You are done," Jonas said. "What?" Eddie stood up, his chair scraping loudly. "Over a joke? Jonas, come on, go to the bunkhouse," Jonas said, his voice dropping an octave, turning to ice. "Pack your roll. Luke will pay you out for the week. If you are on my land in an hour, I will shoot you for trespassing." Eddie looked at Jonas, looking for a bluff. He saw none. He saw only the flat, gray certainty of violence. Eddie swallowed, his face paling. He grabbed his hat and scrambled out the back door without another word. The room remained silent. Jonas looked at the other men. "Anyone else have a joke they want to tell?" The men shook their heads, mumbling negatives, and quickly exited, eager to be away from the storm inside the house. Jonas turned to Emma. She was rubbing her wrist, her heart hammering against her ribs. She felt a wash of relief so potent it made her knees weak, but beneath it was a tremor of fear. She had just seen a man's livelihood destroyed in 10 seconds. She had seen how easily Jonas wielded his power, "Are you all right?" Jonas asked. "Yes," Emma whispered. "Thank you." He did not smile. He did not offer comfort. He simply nodded, put on his hat, and walked out into the snow. The winter did not relent. The landscape of the Wyoming Territory seemed determined to prove that human life was a fragile, temporary thing. Emma's days were a battle against the elements. Monday was wash day. Marta was too old to haul the heavy wet linens, so the task fell to Emma. She boiled water in great copper kettles, the steam filling the kitchen, but the real fight was outside. She carried the basket of wet sheets out to the line. The wind was a physical antagonist. It snatched at the fabric, whipping the heavy wet cotton into frenzy. The sheets froze almost instantly, turning into stiff, white boards that cut her hands. Emma struggled with a shirt, the wind tearing it from her grip. She chased it into a drift, sinking to her knees. The cold air burned her lungs. Her fingers were cracked and bleeding, the skin around her knuckles raw and broken. She looked out over the vast, white fields. In the distance, the black shapes of cattle dotted the snow like ink spots on a blank page. The mountains were jagged teeth against the sky. It was a hostile, murderous beauty. She wondered if the land wanted to kill them all, if it resented their warm blood and their fires. Yet, there were moments that stole her breath for different reasons. One morning, she went out to empty the ashes. The sun was just cresting the eastern ridge. The light hit the snow-covered peaks, turning them a brilliant, burning pink and gold. The air was filled with diamond dust, millions of tiny ice crystals suspended in the light. It was so beautiful it hurt. And at night, when the wind died down, the silence was profound. The stars were not like the stars in Missouri. Here, they were fierce, burning white holes in the black velvet sky, close enough to touch. Emma began to see Jonas in these contradictions of the land. He was harsh, unyielding, and dangerous, but there were cracks in the stone. She watched him from the kitchen window. She saw how he checked every horse personally before a storm, running his hands over their legs, checking their hooves. He treated the animals with a gentle respect he rarely showed people. One afternoon, she found a package on the kitchen table. It was wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a pair of small, sheepskin mittens. "For the boy," Marta said, chopping carrots. His hands were getting red. Emma looked at the mittens. They were new, well made. "Did you make these, Marta?" Marta snorted. "With my arthritis?" "No, the boss brought them from the supply shed. Said he found them." Emma ran her thumb over the soft wool. Jonas had noticed. He had not said a word, but he had noticed. Later that week, cleaning the main room, Emma dusted the gun rack. There was a small, light rifle there, a repeater, polished to a high shine but clearly unused. The stock was engraved with a small flower. She was wiping the barrel when Jonas entered. He stopped, his body going rigid. "Do not touch that," he said sharply. Emma jumped, nearly dropping the cloth. "I am sorry, I was just dusting." "Leave it," Jonas said, his voice tight. "Just leave it." He walked over and took the rifle from her hands. He did not put it back immediately. He held it, his large hands encompassing the small stock. His expression softened, a veil of grief dropping over his eyes. For a moment, he looked 10 years older. Then, carefully, reverently, he placed it back on the rack. Emma watched him, her heart twisting. It was a child's gun, or a woman's. The realization that Jonas Hale was not just a statue of ice, but a man carrying a graveyard inside him, stirred a confusing warmth in her chest. She wanted to ask, but the wall was back up. He turned and walked away without a word. The wind returned 3 nights later, a chinook that rattled the window panes in their frames. The house groaned like a ship at sea. In the middle of the night, a scream tore through the darkness. Emma bolted upright. "Caleb." She scrambled out of bed, her feet bare on the cold floor. Caleb was thrashing in his sleep, caught in the grip of a nightmare. "No, no, don't!" he cried out, his voice high and terrified. Emma gathered him into her arms. "Shh, baby, I am here. Mama is here." He was shaking. sobbing against her chest. "It is the cold. It is the dark." The door to the bedroom opened. Light flooded in from the hallway. Jonas stood there, holding a kerosene lamp. He was wearing his trousers and a Henley shirt, his feet bare. His hair was tousled from sleep. "Is he all right?" Jonas asked, his voice rough with sleep. "Just a nightmare," Emma said, rocking Caleb. The wind scared him. Jonas hesitated in the doorway. Most men would have left, grumbling about the noise. Jonas stepped inside. He set the lamp on the bedside table and sat on the edge of the mattress. The mattress dipped under his weight. Caleb looked up, eyes wet with tears, sniffing. "Mr. Jonas." "Hello, son," Jonas said. "That is a lot of noise for a little fellow." "The wind is trying to get in," Caleb whispered. Jonas looked at the window, rattling in its frame. He looked back at Caleb. "The wind is just loud. It has no teeth. It feels like wolves," Caleb said. Jonas nodded solemnly. "It does. But let me tell you something about this wind." Emma watched, fascinated. Jonas's harsh angles seemed to soften in the lamplight. "Once," Jonas said, his voice low and rhythmic, "there was a little calf born in a storm just like this. He was smaller than the others. The wind howled and tried to blow him over. It snowed so hard you could not see your own hand. The calf was scared. He wanted to lie down. What did he do?" Caleb asked, his sobbing quieting. He stood up. Jonas said he dug his hooves into the snow. He put his head down, and he pushed back. He told the wind, "You can blow, but I am not moving." And because he was brave, the wind got tired. It blew itself out, and when the sun came up, that calf was the strongest one in the herd. Caleb sniffed again, wiping his nose. Was he really? He really was. Jonas said, "You are safe here." "Caleb, this house is made of stone and oak. It has stood for 20 years. The wind cannot touch you." Caleb nodded slowly, his eyelids drooping. Jonas reached out to pull the quilt up. Emma reached for it at the same time. Their hands brushed. A jolt, like static electricity, shot through Emma's arm. She pulled back slightly, her breath catching. Jonas went still. He looked at her. In the soft light of the lamp, the distance between them evaporated. She was in her nightdress, her hair loose around her shoulders. He was half-dressed, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. For a heartbeat, the air in the room was thicker than the storm outside. Jonas's eyes searched hers, dark and unfathomable. There was a hunger there, buried deep under layers of control, a reflection of the strange, terrifying pull she felt in her own belly. Then Jonas cleared his throat and stood up abruptly. "Go back to sleep," he said gruffly. He took the lamp and left, closing the door, plunging the room back into shadows. Emma sat in the dark, her hand still tingling where he had touched her, her heart racing a rhythm she could not slow down. She could not sleep. An hour later, leaving Caleb peaceful and breathing deeply, she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and crept downstairs. She needed water. She needed to cool the heat in her blood. The main room was dark, save for the dying embers in the great fireplace. But a figure sat in the leather armchair facing the hearth. Jonas. He had a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He did not look around as she entered. "I thought you were asleep," he said. "I could not," Emma admitted. She walked closer to the fire, craving the warmth. "Thank you. For Caleb. You are good with him." Jonas took a drink. He stared into the red coals. "I am out of practice." He sounded desolate. Emma took a step closer. "The rifle," she said softly. "The one with the flower." "It was your daughter's." Jonas's hand tightened on the glass. He was silent for so long she thought he would order her to leave. "Sarah," he said finally. "Her name was Sarah, and my wife was Eleanor." Emma waited, holding her breath. "It was spring," Jonas said, his voice monotone, reciting a verdict he had read 1,000 times, 5 years ago. "The river was high, meltwater. I wanted to move the herd to the north pasture. I was in a hurry. I was greedy for the grass. I told them to cross in the wagon. He swirled the whiskey in the glass. I told them it was safe. I was the one who said it was safe. Oh, Jonas? Emma whispered. The wagon tipped. Jonas said, "The current took it. I was on my horse. I watched them go under. I watched the water take them. And there was nothing I could do. I built this empire. I own this valley. And I could not pull them out of 5 feet of water." He looked up at her then. His face was ravaged by the memory, stripped of all its defenses. "That is why I do not take guests. Emma, that is why I do not want people in this house, because everything I touch, I break." Emma felt tears streaming down her face. She moved without thinking, kneeling beside his chair. She reached out and placed her hand over his, the one clenching the armrest. It was an accident. "Jonas," she said fiercely, the land is cruel. It was not you." Jonas looked at her hand on his. His skin was rough. Hers was chapped and red. 2 damaged things finding contact in the dark. "You should go back to bed," Jonas whispered. His voice was hoarse. "You should stay away from me. I'm not afraid of you." Emma said, "You should be," Jonas replied. He turned his hand over, catching hers. His grip was strong, desperate. For a moment, he leaned toward her, drawn by a gravity neither could resist. Emma leaned in, her lips parting slightly, the smell of whiskey and wood smoke filling her senses. But he stopped. He pulled back, releasing her hand as if it burned him. "Go," he commanded. Emma stood, trembling. She looked at him one last time, a man breaking apart in the silence of his fortress. She turned and ran up the stairs, escaping the fire, escaping him, escaping the terrifying realization that she was falling in love with the beast in the castle. The house settled into silence, but the air had changed. It was no longer just cold and empty. It was charged, electric with the things they had said, and the things they had almost done. The storm outside was ending, but the storm inside was just beginning. The blizzard finally broke on a Tuesday, shattering the gray ceiling of the sky to reveal a sun so bright and a blue so piercing it made the eyes water. The world had been remade in white. Drifts curled like frozen waves over the fence posts, and the cottonwood trees along the creek stood like skeletons dipped in glass. The road to Red Bluff was open, though treacherous. Jonas sent a crew out at dawn to break the trail, their shovels ringing in the crisp air. By mid-morning, the path was clear enough for a wagon, provided the horses were strong and the driver steady. Marta announced that the pantry was dangerously low on flour and coffee. Emma, desperate to escape the confinement of the ranch house and the confusing, heavy silence that had settled between her and Jonas since the night of the nightmare, volunteered to go. Jonas was checking a saddle in the barn when she told him. He frowned, the leather creaking in his grip. "It is not a good idea," Jonas said, not looking at her. "We need supplies." "Jonas," Emma replied, adjusting her shawl. "And Marta cannot lift the sacks by herself. I have to go." Jonas stopped working. He looked at her, his expression tight. "The road is not the problem. Emma, towns like Red Bluff are small places with long memories and loose tongues. You know what they are saying." "I can imagine," Emma said, lifting her chin. "But I will not hide in this house like a criminal. I have done nothing wrong." Jonas studied her face, seeing the stubborn set of her jaw that he was beginning to know well. He sighed, a sound of frustration and resignation. "Take Luke," he ordered, "and take the big wagon. Do not stop for conversation. You buy what you need, and you come back." The drive to town took 4 hours in the heavy snow. The air was brittle with cold, stinging Emma's cheeks. When they finally rolled down the main street of Red Bluff, Emma felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. The town was waking up from the storm. Men were shoveling boardwalks. Chimneys puffed gray smoke into the azure sky. As the hail wagon clattered past the saloon and the livery stable, heads turned. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Emma kept her gaze fixed on the ears of the team, but she could feel the eyes on her. They felt like physical touches, greasy and unwelcome. Luke parked the wagon in front of the General Mercantile. "You go on in, Mrs. Price," Luke said, his voice gruff but kind. "I will load the feed from the loading dock." Emma nodded and helped Marta down. Together. They entered the store. The warmth of the potbelly stove hit them, smelling of dried tobacco, spices, and woolen coats. The store was busy. 3 women were examining bolts of calico near the counter, and the clerk, Mr. Gable, was weighing nails for a farmer. As the door chimed shut behind Emma, the hum of conversation severed instantly. The silence that followed was loud and aggressive. The 3 women at the counter turned, their eyes swept over Emma, taking in her mended coat, her worn boots, and the defiant tilt of her head. Then, with synchronized disdain, they turned their backs, pulling their skirts closer as if Emma were carrying a contagion. Emma walked to the counter, her heart hammering. Mr. Gable looked down at his ledger, refusing to meet her eyes. "Good morning, Mr. Gable," Emma said clearly. "Mr. Gable shuffled some papers. "What do you need?" he mumbled. Speaking to the wood of the counter, Marta stepped forward, slapping a list down. 50 pounds of flour, 10 pounds of sugar, 5 of coffee. And I need to see your dried beans. Mr. Gable scurried off to fill the order, eager to escape the tension. While they waited, the door opened again. Mrs. Sterling, the pastor's wife, entered. She was a severe woman with a mouth drawn in a permanent line of disapproval. She saw Emma and stopped. The other women watched, holding their breath. Mrs. Sterling walked straight up to Emma. She did not say hello. She reached into her reticule and pulled out a small, gray pamphlet. She pressed it into Emma's hand. Emma looked down. The title was printed in bold, black block letters, Repentance and Womanly Virtue, a guide for the fallen. Emma's face burned. The heat started at her neck and flooded her cheeks. She felt stripped naked, judged and condemned without a trial. "I thought you might find this useful, Mrs. Sterling said, her voice dripping with a poisonous sweetness. "Given your situation, we pray for you, my dear. It is never too late to leave a life of sin." Emma's hand trembled. She wanted to crumble. She wanted to drop the paper and run out into the snow and keep running until she disappeared. The shame was a familiar taste, bitter as bile, the same shame Samuel had fed her for years. "You are nothing. You are dirt." But then she thought of Caleb. She thought of him sitting at the kitchen table, tracing the letters of his name. If she shrank now, if she let them break her, what kind of mother was she? What kind of future was she building for him? Emma slowly raised her eyes. She looked Mrs. Sterling in the face. She did not crumple the pamphlet. She did not throw it. She handed it back, her movement steady and deliberate. "Keep it," Emma said, her voice ringing clear in the silent store. "I believe you need it more than I do. The Bible says, 'Judge not, lest ye be judged.' I am working for my keep. Mrs. Sterling, I am feeding my son. If that is a sin in your church, then I will take my chances with God directly." "Mrs. Sterling's mouth fell open. The women at the counter gasped. Emma turned to the counter where Mr. Gable had returned, looking terrified. "Put it on the Hale account," Emma said. "Luke is at the dock." She took Marta's arm and walked out of the store, her head high, her back straight as a rod. Only when she was safely in the wagon, hidden by the high sides, did she let her hands shake. Marta patted her knee with a gloved hand. "You did good, girl. You did good." While Emma fought her battle in the mercantile, a different kind of negotiation was happening 3 miles east, at the Bar C Ranch. Elias Crowther sat in his study, a room dominated by dark mahogany and the smell of expensive cigars. Crowther was a man who believed that the world was a pie and that Jonas Hale had taken a slice that was too big. He hated Jonas not for any personal slight, but for his success. Jonas controlled the best water rights. Jonas had the biggest herd. Jonas had the respect of the territorial governor. Crowther wanted that respect. He wanted that power, and he had found a weapon. The weapon was sitting in the leather chair opposite him, nursing a tumbler of whiskey. Samuel Price did not look like a threat. He looked like a ruin. He was thin. his face mapped with broken capillaries from years of drink. His coat was threadbare, and his boots were split at the seams. He had been drifting west for months, chasing the ghost of a luck that had never existed, leaving a trail of unpaid debts and bar brawls in his wake. Crowther had found him in a saloon in Cheyenne, telling a weeping story about a runaway wife to anyone who would buy him around. "So," Crowther said, leaning back in his chair, "you say she is at the Hale place?" Samuel nodded, his eyes watery and resentful. "Took my boy, just up and left in the middle of the night. Stole my money, too. He lied easily. It was a habit, like breathing." Crowther swirled his cigar smoke in the air. "Jonas Hale is a hard man. Mr. Price. He does not give up what he considers his, and right now, he seems to think your wife and son are his." Samuel's hand tightened on the glass. "She is my wife. The law says she is mine. The law does." Crowther agreed. "But out here, the law is often what Jonas Hale says it is. Unless what?" Samuel asked, looking up. "Unless you have friends," Crowther said smoothly. "Unless you have resources. You see, Mr. Price, I am a man who believes in the sanctity of the family. It grieves me to see a father separated from his son. It grieves me to see a wealthy tyrant like Hale stealing another man's happiness just because he can." Crowther pushed a small pouch across the desk. It clinked heavily. "I would like to help you, Samuel. I would like to help you get cleaned up. Get a lawyer. Go into town and tell your story. I think you will find that the good people of Red Bluff do not take kindly to adultery and kidnapping." Samuel stared at the money. He licked his dry lips. He thought about Emma. He did not miss her. He missed having someone to blame. He missed having someone to fetch his boots and cook his meals and take the brunt of his anger when the cards went against him. He remembered the feeling of power he had when she cowered. And he remembered the boy, Caleb. The boy looked at him with eyes that were too old, eyes that judged him. He wanted to break that look. "I want my boy back," Samuel said, his voice thickening with false emotion. "Of course you do," Crowther said, smiling like a shark. "And we are going to get him for you, and in the process, we are going to teach Jonas Hale a lesson about taking things that do not belong to him." Emma sat on the porch steps, peeling apples into a wooden bowl. The sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of violet and indigo. The air was cold, but the wind had died down. It had been a week since the trip to town. The sting of the encounter had faded, but the memory remained, a dull ache in her chest. Jonas walked up from the corral. He moved with a long, easy stride, his spurs chinking softly on the frozen ground. He stopped at the bottom of the steps, taking off his hat to beat the dust from it. "Evening," he said. "Evening." Emma replied. He hesitated, then sat down on the step below her. He did not look at her, staring out at the darkening horizon. "Luke told me what happened in the store," Jonas said. Emma's hands paused. "I did not want to trouble you with it." "It is no trouble to know who my enemies are," Jonas said. "And Mrs. Sterling is an enemy to anyone with a pulse and a joyful thought." Emma smiled faintly. "She thinks I am a fallen woman." Jonas turned to look at her. The twilight softened the hard planes of his face. He looked tired. "They talk because they are small," Jonas said, "and because they do not understand." "Understand what?" "Understand that life is not a straight line," Jonas said. He looked down at his hands, scarred and calloused. He took a breath, as if bracing himself. "Emma, I have been thinking about the spring, about when the road is clear for good." Emma's heart skipped a beat. She set the bowl aside. "Yes, you cannot go on like this, drifting, looking for work in towns that do not have any." Jonas spoke slowly, choosing his words with care. "Caleb needs stability. He needs books. He needs a home." "I know," Emma said softly. "I want you to stay," Jonas said. He said it to the air, not to her. "I want you to stay on as the housekeeper, permanently. I will hire a tutor for the boy. He can learn Latin, mathematics, whatever he needs. You will have a wage, a real one. You will be safe here." Emma looked at his profile. It was a generous offer. It was more than she could have prayed for a month ago. Security, education for Caleb. A home? But there was a thorn in it. And what would my position be? Exactly? Emma asked, her voice cooling. To the town? To you? Jonas shifted uncomfortably. You would be the housekeeper. That is the job. But they will talk. Emma said, You said it yourself. They already think I am your mistress. If I stay, if I take your money and live under your roof without a ring, they will never let Caleb forget it. Let them talk, Jonas said, his voice hardening with that familiar, arrogant edge. I do not care what they say, and neither should you. I care, Emma cried out, surprising them both. I care because I have spent my whole marriage being property. Samuel owned me. He owned my time, my labor, my body. He told me what to do and where to go. She stood up, the apples tumbling onto the porch. You are offering me a cage. Jonas, a gilded one, maybe. But you are still the one holding the key. You offer me protection, but the price is my name. The price is being Jonas Hale's woman in the eyes of the world, dependent on your charity. Jonas stood up too, towering over her. His eyes flashed with anger. It is not charity. It is a life. Do you think you will find better scrubbing floors in a saloon in Cheyenne? Do you think you will be free when you are starving in a gutter? I would rather starve than be owned again. Emma shouted back. I am not Samuel, Jonas roared, the name hung in the air between them. Jonas breathed heavily, his chest heaving. He looked stricken, as if he hadn't meant to yell. I am not him, Jonas said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. I would never hurt you. I would never raise a hand to you or the boy. I am trying to give you the only thing I have. I have this land. I have this house. I have my name. He took a step closer, his intensity radiating off him like heat. If the town needs a ring to shut their mouths, then we can give them that. 2. Emma froze. Was he proposing? Like this? In anger? As a practical solution to a problem of logistics? Is that what you want? Emma asked, her voice trembling. A marriage of convenience, to save my reputation. I want you safe, Jonas said. He looked at her, his eyes searching hers, desperate and guarded all at once. I want you here, but he did not say the word. He did not say love. He could not. The ghost of his wife, the ghost of his failure, stood between them, choking the words in his throat. Emma stepped back. I cannot trade one master for another. Jonas, even a kind one, unless it is equal, unless it is for us, not just for safety. She turned and ran into the house, leaving him standing alone in the cold twilight, the spilled apples at his feet like fallen hearts. That night, the wind returned with a vengeance. It was a dry, howling gale that came down from the peaks, screaming around the corners of the ranch house. Emma lay in her bed, wide awake. Her argument with Jonas played over and over in her mind. She felt a profound ache of regret. She knew he had been trying to help. She knew he cared. But the fear of the cage was so deep, etched into her bones by years of Samuel's cruelty. She heard a loud bang from across the room. The heavy wooden shutter on the west window had torn loose from its latch. It slammed against the outer wall, then banged back against the frame. Snow and wind gusted into the room, swirling in the darkness. Emma leapt out of bed. She rushed to the window, the icy air cutting through her thin nightgown. She grabbed the shutter, trying to pull it closed, but the wind was too strong. It ripped the wood from her fingers, slamming it back. Let me. Jonas was there. He had heard the noise. He pushed past her, his large frame filling the window. He grabbed the shutter with both hands, muscles straining against the force of the gale. Together, they fought the wind. Emma grabbed the latch, her fingers numb. Pull, she yelled over the roar. Jonas grunted, hauling the wood inward. Emma slammed the iron latch home. The noise stopped instantly. The room was suddenly quiet. Save for the sound of their heavy breathing, they were standing in the dark, illuminated only by the faint gray light of the snow outside. They were close, so close. Jonas turned to face her. He was shirtless, wearing only his trousers, his chest heaving from the exertion. Emma stood before him in her cotton nightgown, her shawl having slipped to the floor. She was shivering, but not just from the cold. "Are you all right?" Jonas asked, his voice rough. "Yes," Emma whispered. He did not move away. He should have left. Propriety demanded it. But he stood there, rooted to the spot. He reached out, his hand, large and warm and trembling slightly, cupped her face. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. "Emma," he breathed. The name was a surrender. Emma leaned into his touch. The heat of his body was a magnet. All the anger of the afternoon, all the fear, incinerated in the sudden, overwhelming need to be close to him. She placed her hands on his bare chest, over his heart. She felt it pounding, a frantic rhythm that matched her own. Jonas made a low sound in his throat and lowered his head. The kiss was not gentle. It was not the tentative exploration of a courtship. It was a collision. It was abrupt, hungry, and desperate. It tasted of longing and months of denied desire. Jonas's arms went around her, pulling her crushed against him. Emma clung to him, her fingers digging into his shoulders, opening to him. For a moment, the world narrowed down to the friction of skin, the taste of his mouth, the overwhelming strength of his arms holding her up. It was terrifying. It was the most real thing Emma had ever felt. Then, Jonas pulled back. He broke the kiss, gasping for air, stepping back as if he had been burned. He looked at her in the darkness, his eyes wide with shock. He ran a hand through his hair, his chest rising and falling. I am sorry," he rasped. "I did not mean to scare you." He looked horrified. He thought he had become the predator she feared. He thought he had taken advantage of her vulnerability. Emma stood there, her lips throbbing, her body humming with a strange, vibrant energy. She looked at this powerful, terrified man. "You did not scare me, Jonas," she said softly. Jonas looked at her, searching for the lie, but found none. He let out a long, shaky breath. "I cannot do this," he whispered. "I cannot take you because you have nowhere else to go. That is not right." He stepped back toward the door, retreating into the shadows. "Nothing changes. Emma," he said, his voice firming up, trying to find his balance. "Nothing changes between us unless you say it does. Unless you choose it. You are free here. Do you understand?" He was giving her the power. He was handing her the key to the cage he had inadvertently built. "I understand," Emma said. Jonas nodded once, sharp and jerky, and fled the room. Emma sank onto the edge of her bed. She touched her lips. She felt more alive than she had in years, and she knew, with a terrifying certainty, that she was in love with him, and that love might be the most dangerous thing of all. 3 days later, the trouble arrived. It came in the form of a carriage rolling down the main street of Red Bluff, flanked by 2 of Elias Crowther's riders. Samuel Price stepped out of the carriage in front of the sheriff's office. He was shaved. He was wearing a new suit, ill-fitting but respectable. He held a hat in his hands, looking humble and aggrieved. Crowther stood beside him, placing a supportive hand on his shoulder. Within an hour, the story was spreading through the town like wildfire. The poor, heartbroken husband had arrived, the man who had been searching for his lost family for months, only to find them stolen by the rich, arrogant cattle baron Jonas Hale. The town, already primed by the gossip and misses. Sterling's indignation ate it up. They loved a scandal, but they loved a victim more, especially if it allowed them to hate someone powerful. Samuel wept in the pastor's office. He told stories of how Emma had been seduced by Hale's wealth. He admitted he was a flawed man, a poor man, but he loved his son. He just wanted his boy back. The sheriff, a man named Miller, who owed Crowther money and votes, listened with a sympathetic ear. At the ranch, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew heavy, charged with a static that made the hairs on Emma's arms stand up. Jonas felt it first. He stopped coming in for midday meals. He began carrying his rifle, the heavy Winchester, in the scabbard on his saddle at all times. He sent Luke and the other hands to ride the perimeter fences, doubling the patrols. Emma watched him from the porch. He stood by the corral, looking toward the road to town. his body tense as a coiled spring. "What is it?" Emma asked him one evening, watching the sun dip below the mountains in a blood-red haze. "Something is coming," Jonas said quietly. He nodded toward the distant hills. A flock of ravens was circling, black specks against the darkening sky and on the wind, carrying the scent of melting snow and mud. There was something else, a faint, sweet smell of rot. The coyotes began to yip in the canyons, a frantic, mocking chorus. "Stay close to the house tomorrow." "Emma," Jonas said, turning to her, "do not let Caleb wander past the barn." "Why?" Emma asked, fear clutching her throat. "Because the thaw brings out the snakes," Jonas said grimly, "and I think the biggest ones are headed this way." The thaw arrived with the violence of a breaking fever. The silence of winter was replaced by the roar of water. The snow, once a pristine blanket, collapsed into heavy, gray slush that turned the ranch yard into a quagmire of ankle-deep mud. The creek, usually a polite ribbon of water, swelled into a turbulent brown torrent, chewing at the banks and threatening the low-lying pastures. The cattle were in danger. The thaw had come too fast, and the herd was stranded on the soggy bottoms. Jonas had no choice. He had to ride. At dawn, the ranch was a hive of frantic activity. Men shouted over the noise of the wind, cinching saddles and loading supply mules. Jonas stood by the back porch, his duster heavy with mud already, his face grim. He looked at Emma, who stood in the doorway, Caleb peeking from behind her skirts. "We will be gone 3 days," Jonas said, pulling on his gloves. "Maybe 4. The herd is spooked, and the water is rising fast." "I understand," Emma said. She tried to keep her voice steady, but the thought of him leaving, of the ranch being empty of his presence, opened a hollow pit in her stomach. "Keep the doors bolted at night," Jonas instructed, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Do not let the boy out of your sight, and do not go to town, not for anything." "I won't," Emma promised. Jonas hesitated. He looked at her, and for a moment, the urgency of the cattle drive faded. He reached out, his hand hovering near her arm before dropping to his side. "I will be back," he said. It was a vow. He turned and mounted his black gelding in one fluid motion. With a sharp whistle, he led the column of riders out toward the swollen creek, the mud sucking at the horses' hooves. Emma watched until they were just dark specks against the gray-green hills. The silence they left behind was heavy, filled with the rush of water and the uneasy feeling that the walls of her sanctuary had suddenly become very thin. While Jonas battled the floodwaters, Elias Crowther and Samuel Price made their move. It was a strategy born of Crowther's malice and Samuel's greed. They knew Jonas was away. Crowther had scouts watching the herd movements. The lion of the valley was gone, leaving his den unguarded. Samuel walked into the sheriff's office in Red Bluff with a sheaf of papers in his hand. They were tattered and stained, but they were legal. A marriage certificate, a birth record for Caleb. "She is my lawful wife." "Sheriff," Samuel said, his voice trembling with practiced indignation, "I have the right to my family. That man, that Hale, he has turned her head. He has kept her there against my will." Sheriff Miller looked at the papers, then at Samuel. Miller was a practical man who knew which side of his bread Elias Crowther buttered. "If she is your wife, she belongs with you," Miller said, spitting tobacco juice into a brass spittoon. "The law is clear on that." Crowther, standing by the window, smiled. "I would be happy to lend Mr. Price a few of my men, Sheriff, to ensure there is no misunderstanding. Hale's hands can be rough. We just want to see justice done." The sheriff nodded. "Go on, then, but bring them back here. I want this done legal." It was mid-afternoon on the second day of Jonas's absence. The sun was trying to push through the clouds, casting a weak, watery light over the muddy ranch. Emma was in the yard, hanging laundry. The wind was gusty, snapping the wet sheets like sails. Her hands were cold, red from the wet fabric, but the work kept her mind occupied. Caleb was inside, playing with wooden blocks near the window. She heard the horses before she saw them. The rhythmic thud of hooves on mud made her turn. 3 riders were coming up the drive. They were not Hale men. Their horses were unfamiliar, and they rode with a swagger that made Emma's blood turn to ice. She dropped a wet shirt into the basket. She knew the man in the center instantly. It was the slump of his shoulders, the way he held the reins, loose and careless. It was the smirk that she had seen 1,000 times, usually right before he hit her. Samuel, terror, pure and white-hot, flooded her veins. For a second, she couldn't breathe. The sky seemed to tilt. He reined in his horse 10 feet from her. The mud splattered his boots. He looked down at her, his eyes running over her face, her dress, her body, with a possessive sneer. "Hello, girl," Samuel said. The nickname was a slap. It stripped away months of healing, dragging her back to the dark, cramping rooms in Missouri, to the smell of cheap whiskey and fear. "Samuel," Emma whispered. "You look good," Samuel said, swinging down from the saddle. "Better fed than when you ran off. Living high on the hog, are we?" Crowther's men, 2 hard-eyed hired guns, chuckled. "What do you want?" Emma asked, her voice shaking. She took a step back, positioning herself between him and the house. She glanced at the window. Caleb was there, his face pressed to the glass, eyes wide. "I want my wife," Samuel said, taking a step toward her. "I want my son." "You have no wife here," Emma said, finding a sudden, desperate strength. "You left us. You abandoned us. I never abandoned anyone," Samuel shouted, his face twisting into the sudden rage she knew so well. "I went to find work, and I come back to find my house empty and my woman running off with a rich cattleman." He lunged for her. Emma tried to dodge, but he was fast. He grabbed her wrist, his fingers digging into her flesh like claws. The pain was sharp and familiar. "Let go of me," Emma screamed, twisting in his grip. "You are coming with me," Samuel hissed, pulling her close. His breath smelled of peppermint and rot. "You and the boy. You think you can shame me? You think you can play the lady in this big house while I sleep in the dirt?" Crowther's men watched, amused. It was a domestic dispute, after all. A man handling his property. "Help!" Emma screamed toward the bunkhouse. "Luke!" 2 of the ranch hands, older men who had been left behind to guard the home place, came running from the barn. They had shotguns, but they stopped when they saw Crowther's men level their repeaters. "Stay back, old man," one of the hired guns warned. "This is a legal matter." Samuel dragged Emma toward the house. She dug her heels into the mud, fighting him with everything she had. "Caleb!" Emma screamed. "Lock the door!" Samuel slapped her. It was a sharp, stinging blow that knocked her head back. "That is enough of that," Samuel growled. Then, the thunder arrived. It was not from the sky. It was the sound of a horse being ridden to the edge of its life. A black horse exploded around the corner of the barn, its chest heaving, foam flying from its mouth. The rider did not slow down. He drove the animal straight at the group, forcing Crowther's men to scatter, their horses rearing in panic. The rider hauled on the reins, sliding the horse to a halt in a spray of mud. Jonas! He was covered in mud from hat to boot. His eyes were wild, red-rimmed with exhaustion, but burning with a fury that made Samuel freeze. He had ridden ahead. He had sensed it, or maybe he had just ridden until the worry ate him alive. Jonas dropped from the saddle before the horse had fully stopped. He did not draw his gun. He did not need to. He walked toward Samuel with a stride that promised murder. "Get your hands off her," Jonas said. The voice was low, a rumble of shifting earth. Samuel released Emma, stumbling back. Jonas did not stop. He stepped between them, placing his back to Emma, shielding her completely. He loomed over Samuel, radiating a violence that was terrifying in its restraint. "Who are you?" Samuel stammered, trying to regain his bravado. "I am Samuel Price. This is my wife. I have rights." "Rights?" Jonas spat the word. He took another step. Samuel retreated, his boots slipping in the mud. "You have the right to leave," Jonas said, "or you have the right to be buried here." Crowther's men tensed, hands hovering near their guns. Jonas's ranch hands raised their shotguns. The air crackled, one twitch, one wrong word, and the yard would turn into a slaughterhouse. "You cannot threaten me," Samuel shrilled. She is mine! The law says so! The law? Jonas laughed. A harsh, barking sound. You beat her. You starved her. You left her and the boy to freeze in a wagon. You forfeited your rights when you raised a hand to her. I never... Samuel started. Don't lie to me, Jonas roared. He pointed a gloved finger at Samuel's chest. I see the bruises. Price. I see the way the boy shakes when a door slams. You are a coward. You are a small, vicious man who hurts weak things to feel big. Samuel's face turned purple. You stole my family. They are not yours to hurt anymore, Jonas said. His voice dropped to a whisper that carried across the yard. If you touch her again, I will kill you, and I will not lose a wink of sleep over it. The sheriff rode in then. He had been trailing Samuel, taking his time. He arrived with 2 deputies, pulling up their horses at the edge of the standoff. All right, Sheriff Miller shouted. That is enough. Jonas did not turn around. He kept his eyes on Samuel. Sheriff, Samuel cried, pointing a shaking finger. Arrest him. He threatened me. Sheriff Miller looked at the scene. He saw the guns. He saw Jonas Hale, a man who controlled half the valley, looking ready to tear Samuel Price apart with his bare hands. Lower your weapons, Miller ordered. Everyone. Crowther's men holstered their guns slowly. Jonas's men lowered their shotguns. Mr. Hale, Miller said, his voice respectful but firm. Mr. Price here has papers. He has a claim. I do not care about his papers, Jonas said. You have to care. Jonas, Miller said, the law is the law. We have a hearing set for tomorrow morning. The judge is riding in. Until then, Mrs. Price and the boy stay here. But Mr. Price has the right to petition for their return. Jonas finally turned. He looked at the sheriff with cold contempt. You are going to let this animal take them? Jonas asked. I'm going to let the judge decide, Miller said. Now, Mr. Price, you come with me back to town. You too, boys. We will settle this in court. Samuel sneered at Emma, safe behind the sheriff's badge. See you tomorrow, girl, Samuel said. Tell Caleb Daddy is coming home. Jonas took a step forward, his hand twitching toward his gun. Miller put a hand on his own holster. Don't do it, Jonas, Miller warned. Do not make me hang you. Jonas stopped. He vibrated with tension, every muscle locked. He watched as Samuel mounted up, casting one last triumphant look at the house. The group rode off, the mud sucking at their hooves. Silence crashed back down on the ranch yard. Emma stood trembling, rubbing her bruised wrist. The wind tugged at her skirts. She felt the ground tilting beneath her feet. The law was against her. The world was against her. Jonas turned to her. The rage drained out of his face, replaced by a raw, naked fear. Emma, he said. He reached for her. Emma collapsed. Her legs simply gave way. Jonas caught her before she hit the mud. He scooped her up into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. I have you, he whispered into her hair. I have you. That night, the house was a fortress under siege. Every door was bolted. The shutters were closed. Jonas had posted men at the gate and by the barn. In the kitchen, a single lamp burned low. The rest of the house was dark. Emma sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold. Caleb was asleep upstairs, exhausted by the fear. Jonas sat across from her. He had washed the mud off, but he looked haggard. The lines around his eyes were deep trenches. He is going to take him, Emma whispered. Her voice was flat. Dead. The judge will give him Caleb. A father has the right. That is what the law says. Jonas reached across the table. He covered her hand with his. I will not let him, Jonas said. You cannot stop a judge. Jonas, you cannot shoot the law. Emma pulled her hand away. She stood up, pacing the small room. The dam that had held back her terror for months finally broke. You do not know him. Jonas, you do not know what he is like. She turned to him, tears streaming down her face. She ripped open the collar of her dress, exposing the faint silver scar on her collarbone. He did this with a belt buckle because I burned the biscuits. She pulled up her sleeve. He broke my arm when I tried to stop him from selling my mother's locket for whiskey. She was screaming now, the words tearing out of her throat. He used to lock us in the cellar, in the dark, for days. He told Caleb that the rats would eat him if he cried. That is why my son is afraid of the dark. Jonas, that is why he screams at the wind." She collapsed onto the floor, sobbing, her body racking with the force of her grief. "I cannot go back. I cannot let him have my son. I will kill him first. I will kill myself." Jonas was on the floor with her in an instant. He gathered her up, pulling her into his lap. He held her as she shook, rocking her back and forth. His own face was wet with tears. "I am sorry," he choked out. "I am so sorry." He buried his face in her neck. "I failed them. Emma, Sarah, and Eleanor. I let them die. I let the water take them because I was arrogant, because I thought I could control the river." His voice was a broken whisper. "I hear them screaming every night. Every time the wind blows, I see their faces in the water." He pulled back to look at her. His eyes were open, defenseless. "I cannot save them. They are gone. But I can save you. I swear to God. Emma, I will burn this whole territory to the ground before I let him touch you again." Emma looked at him. She saw the man beneath the legend. She saw the boy who had lost everything, the father who had no child, the protector who had failed. And she saw the love. It was not spoken. It did not need to be. It was in the way he held her, as if she were the only solid thing in a dissolving world. "Jonas," she whispered. She reached up and touched his face. The kiss began as a comfort, a meeting of grief, but it ignited the fear, the adrenaline, the hopelessness. It all fueled a fire that consumed them both. Jonas kissed her desperately, drinking in her breath. Emma clung to him, her fingers tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. "Do you see me?" his touch seemed to ask. "Do you see the broken man?" "Yes," her hands answered. "I see you, I want you." They moved together, a tangle of limbs and sorrow. He carried her, not to the guest room, but to the rug before the dying fire. The heat of the stove, the shadows dancing on the walls, the smell of wood smoke and rain. It all faded. There was only him. There was only her. Clothes were discarded with frantic haste. Skin met skin, hot and trembling. Jonas was rough with need but gentle with reverence. He touched her scars as if they were holy things. He worshipped the body that Samuel had despised. And Emma took him in. She opened the gates she had kept locked for so long. She let him see her fear, her desire, her fierce, terrifying hope. They made love with a desperation that bordered on pain. It was a claiming, a binding. It was two survivors clinging to each other in the wreckage of a storm, defying the darkness that tried to swallow them. When it was over, the silence was different. It was not empty. It was full. They lay together on the rug, wrapped in a quilt Jonas had pulled down. The fire had burned down to embers. The wind outside had died. Emma lay with her head on Jonas's chest, listening to his heart slow its frantic rhythm. She felt a peace she had never known, a stillness in the center of the chaos. But with the peace came a new, sharp fear. She traced the line of the scar on his shoulder. "If we lose tomorrow," she started. "We won't," Jonas said. His arm tightened around her. "But if we do, then we run," Jonas said. He sounded serious. "I have money buried. Gold. We take the boy. We go to California or Mexico, somewhere the law cannot find us." Emma lifted her head to look at him. "You would leave the ranch? You would leave everything, your land, your name?" Jonas looked at her. His eyes were clear, the gunmetal gray softened by the dawn light creeping into the room. "It is just dirt, Emma. Without you, it is just dirt and ghosts." Emma felt her heart swell until she thought it might burst. He would give it all up. The cattle baron, the king of the valley. He would become a fugitive for her. She kissed him, soft and slow. "We will not run," she said. Jonas frowned. "Emma, no," she said firmly. "We will not run. We will not let him chase us away. We will stand. We will go to that court, and we will tell the truth. And if the town condemns us, let them—" She laid her head back down. "I am done running. Jonas." Jonas kissed the top of her head. "Okay," he whispered. "We stand." But as the sun began to rise, painting the mud of the ranch yard in hues of blood and gold. They both knew the truth. Standing meant fighting, and in the West, fighting often meant bleeding. They lay there for a few minutes more, holding onto the fragile peace of the morning, before the world came crashing back in. The Red Bluff Courthouse was a building of red brick and pretension, sitting squat in the center of town like a toad in the dust. It was too small for the crowd that had gathered. The air inside was stifling, smelling of unwashed bodies, stale tobacco smoke, and the sharp, metallic tang of anticipation. To the people of Red Bluff, this was not a legal proceeding. It was theater. It was the morality play they had been whispering about for months, finally brought to the stage. They packed the wooden benches, fanning themselves with hats and handkerchiefs, their eyes darting between the defendant's table and the front row where the quality sat. Emma Price sat at a small table, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. She wore her best dress, a dark blue wool that Marta had helped her press, but she felt naked under the gaze of the town. To her left sat the church women, a row of black bonnets and pinched mouths. Mrs. Sterling was there, sitting ramrod straight, her eyes fixed on Emma with a look of triumphant pity. They had already judged her. To them, she was the woman who had walked out of a blizzard and into a rich man's bed without a ring. The details did not matter. The sin was the story. To her right, at the plaintiff's table, sat Samuel. He was clean-shaven. He wore a suit that Elias Crowther had undoubtedly paid for. He held a hat in his hands, turning the brim round and round. His head bowed. He looked broken. He looked like a man who had been wronged by the cruel whims of fate and a faithless wife. Crowther sat behind him, leaning back with the ease of a man who owned the chairs, the building, and likely the judge. Judge Archibald Thorne sat behind the high bench. He was a portly man with a face flushed by drink and heat. He mopped his brow with a silk handkerchief and banged his gavel. "Order," the judge boomed. "We are here to hear the petition of Samuel Price regarding the custody of his son, Caleb Price, and the return of his lawful wife, Emma Price." Emma flinched at the word return, as if she were a stray heifer that had wandered through a broken fence. Samuel's lawyer, a thin man from Cheyenne named Mr. Reed, stood up. "Your Honor," Reed began, his voice smooth as oil. "The facts are simple. My client is the boy's father. He is the woman's husband. There has been no divorce. There has been no legal separation. Mr. Price went west to seek his fortune, to build a life for his family. When he returned, he found his home abandoned. He found his wife living in the home of another man, a man of significant means." Reed paused, letting the implication hang in the hot air. "We are not here to cast stones," Reed continued, casting a stone with every word. "We are here to restore the natural order. A boy belongs with his father. A wife belongs with her husband. Mr. Price is willing to forgive. He is willing to take her back. He simply wants his family restored." The crowd murmured. Heads nodded. It sounded right. It sounded biblical. Judge Thorne looked at Emma. "Mrs. Price, you left your home in Missouri?" "I did," Emma said. Her voice was a whisper. "Speak up, woman," Thorne barked. "I did," Emma said, louder this time. "And you took the boy." "I did. And you are currently residing at the Hale Ranch?" "Yes." The judge leaned forward. "And what is your relationship to Mr. Hale?" Emma opened her mouth, but the words stuck in her throat. "Housekeeper? Servant? Guest? Lover?" Every word felt like a trap. "She works for me." A deep voice cut through the room. Jonas Hale stood up. He had been sitting in the back, a dark shape in the shadows. Now he moved to the front, walking with the heavy, deliberate gait of a man who spent his life in the saddle. He was not wearing a suit. He wore his ranch clothes, clean denim, a vest, a black coat. He looked dangerous and out of place in the cramped room. "State your name for the record," the judge said, though everyone knew who he was. "Jonas Hale, Mr. Hale," the judge said, eyeing him warily. "You are not a party to this suit. I am the one feeding them." Jonas said, I am the one housing them. That makes me a party." He stopped at the railing that separated the gallery from the court. He looked at Samuel, who refused to meet his eyes. "I found them in a blizzard 5 months ago," Jonas said, addressing the room rather than the judge. "They were walking. They had no wagon. They had no food. The boy was half frozen. Mrs. Price had sold her wedding ring to buy flour." "That is irrelevant," Reed interrupted. "Hardship does not negate a marriage contract. It is relevant if the hardship was caused by the husband." Jonas shot back. His voice was not loud, but it carried to the back of the room. "I saw the bruises. Judge, old ones and new ones. On her arms, on her back." The crowd gasped. A ripple of whispered conversation broke out. "Mrs." Sterling stiffened. Jonas turned to face the crowd. He looked at the men he had done business with, the women who had snubbed Emma in the street. "You all know me," Jonas said. "You know I do not let people in. You know I keep to myself. I did not ask for them to come, but I let them stay. And I have watched them. I have watched that boy wake up screaming because he thinks his father is coming through the door." He looked at Emma. His eyes were steady, anchoring her. "I care for them," Jonas said. The admission hit the room like a physical blow. Jonas Hale, the man of ice, the man who had buried his heart in the river 5 years ago, was standing in open court, admitting to a softness. "I care for them," he repeated. "And whatever is between us, it started long after this man." Jonas pointed a finger at Samuel, drank their money away and left them to starve. "If the court will not protect them, I will. I will take responsibility for the boy. I will see to his education. I will see to his future." Crowther stood up then. He did not look angry. He looked amused. "Mr. Hale is very generous," Crowther drawled. "But the law is not about generosity. It is about rights. And one might wonder, what exactly is the nature of this care? Is it the care of a guardian? Or is it the care of a man who has taken a younger, vulnerable woman into his bed and wishes to keep his plaything?" The word plaything hung in the air, ugly and crude. Jonas took a step toward Crowther. The sheriff put a hand on his gun. "Sit down. Mr. Crowther," the judge ordered. Though he looked interested in the answer, "Mrs. Price, stand up." Emma stood. Her legs felt like water. "Is it true?" the judge asked. "Did your husband beat you?" "Yes," Emma said. "Do you have proof? Witnesses?" Emma looked around. There were no witnesses. Only Caleb, who was waiting in the sheriff's office. "Too young to testify. He hit me when he drank." Emma said, "He broke my arm 2 years ago. Samuel jumped up. That is a lie. She fell from the hayloft. I set the bone myself. I took care of her. Sit down." "Mr. Price," the judge yelled. "Mrs. Price," the judge continued, his voice skeptical. "A man has a right to discipline his household. Was this discipline, or was it cruelty?" The question made Emma sick. "Discipline," as if she were a dog. "It was cruelty," Emma said, her voice trembling. "And yet you stayed? For 7 years? I had nowhere to go. But you have somewhere to go now, don't you?" The judge gestured to Jonas. "A rich man's house, a warm bed. It is very convenient, isn't it? To claim abuse when a better offer comes along." Emma felt the trap closing. They were twisting it. They were turning her survival into a scheme. She looked at the faces in the crowd. They were nodding. They believed it. A woman leaving her husband was a sinner. A woman leaving a poor husband for a rich one was a whore. She looked at Jonas. He was gripping the railing so hard the wood was groaning. He looked ready to vault over it and strangle the judge. Then she looked past Jonas. Through the open door of the sheriff's office at the back of the room, she saw a small face. Caleb. He was watching her. His eyes were wide and terrified. Emma straightened her spine. The trembling in her hands stopped. She was not doing this for the town. She was not doing this for Jonas. She was doing this for the boy who was watching. "I did not leave for a better offer," Emma said. Her voice was suddenly clear, cutting through the murmurs. "I left because he threatened to sell my son to a work gang to pay a gambling debt." The room went silent. Even Crowther lost his smirk. "I left," Emma said, turning to face the judge directly. Because I would rather freeze to death in a ditch than let my son grow up watching a man hit his mother. I want him to be a man who protects, not a man who destroys. I want him to know that love is not a fist. She pointed at Samuel. He is not a father. He is a memory of fear. And I will not let you give my son back to a memory. She sat down. The silence stretched. A few women in the back row were dabbing their eyes. Mrs. Sterling was staring at her hands. The judge cleared his throat. He looked at Crowther, then at Jonas, then at the papers before him. He was a biased man, but he was not deaf to the shift in the room. This is a difficult case, the judge said. He shuffled his papers. The court acknowledges the sanctity of marriage. However, the court also acknowledges the duty of a father to provide Mr. Price. By your own admission, you have been absent for 6 months. You have no home to offer the boy. Mr. Hale does. Samuel started to protest, but the judge held up a hand. The ruling is as follows. Custody of the minor child, Caleb Price, is granted to the mother, Emma Price. Emma let out a sob of relief. Jonas closed his eyes, exhaling a breath he had held for an hour. However, the judge continued. Raising a finger, the court does not grant a divorce. The marriage remains valid. Mr. Price retains his parental rights. He may petition for visitation once he can prove he has established a suitable residence and gainful employment. The judge looked sternly at Samuel. Until then, Mr. Price, you are to stay away from the Hale Ranch. You are to keep the peace. If I hear of you brawling or threatening your wife, I will put you in the county jail for 6 months. Court is adjourned. The gavel banged. It was a victory, but it was a jagged one. Emma had her son, but she was still Emma Price. She was still tied to the man who had tormented her. The crowd began to file out, the noise rising to a dull roar. Jonas pushed through the gate and came to her side. It is over, he said quietly. Is it? Emma asked, looking at Samuel, who was staring at her with eyes full of hate. Jonas took her arm. Come on, let's get the boy. They walked out of the courthouse and into the blinding glare of the afternoon sun. The street was crowded with people lingering to talk about the verdict. Emma took a deep breath of the dusty air. She felt drained, hollowed out. You think you won? The voice came from behind them. Samuel stood on the bottom step of the courthouse. His face was twisted, the mask of the repentant husband gone. You think you won, girl? Samuel spat. You just humiliated me, in front of the whole town. Go home. Price, Jonas said, stepping in front of Emma. You heard the judge. To hell with the judge, Samuel screamed. He lunged. It happened so fast that the crowd didn't have time to gasp. Samuel threw himself at Emma, his hands reaching for her throat. You ruined me, he shrieked. Jonas moved. He did not panic. He did not hesitate. He stepped into the attack, catching Samuel in midair. The impact was brutal. The two men crashed into the dust of the street. Samuel was flailing, swinging wild, desperate punches. Jonas was methodical. He blocked a blow and drove a hard right hand into Samuel's ribs. Samuel grunted, doubling over. Jonas grabbed him by the lapels of his cheap suit and threw him backward. Samuel stumbled, falling into the dirt. Stay down, Jonas roared. The crowd scrambled back, forming a wide circle. The town buildings loomed over them, silent witnesses. Samuel scrambled to his knees. He wiped blood from his mouth. His eyes were crazy, rolling in his head. I will kill you, Samuel screamed. He reached into his boot. Knife, someone in the crowd yelled. The blade flashed in the sun. It was a long, rusted skinning knife. Samuel charged. Emma screamed Jonas's name. Jonas did not back up. He waited. When Samuel slashed the knife in a wide, clumsy arc, Jonas stepped inside the guard. He caught Samuel's wrist with his left hand, twisting it violently. There was a sickening pop as the wrist broke. Samuel howled, dropping the knife. Jonas swept Samuel's legs out from under him. Samuel hit the ground hard. Before he could move, Jonas drew his revolver. The sound of the hammer cocking was louder than the screams. Jonas stood over Samuel. The barrel of the Colt Peacemaker leveled at the man's forehead. Jonas's chest was heaving. his face a mask of cold, lethal intent. His finger tightened on the trigger. Everyone froze. The crowd, the deputies, even Crowther, who was watching from the porch. They all saw it. They saw that Jonas Hale was not bluffing. He was a heartbeat away from execution. "Do it," Samuel whispered, weeping through his broken teeth. "Do it and go to hell." Jonas stared down the barrel. He wanted to. God, how he wanted to. It would be clean. It would be final. Jonas! It was Emma. She had run to him, grabbing his arm. "Jonas! No! Look at me!" Jonas's eyes flickered. He looked at Emma. He saw the terror in her face, not of Samuel, but of what Jonas was about to become. "Don't," she whispered. "He is not worth your soul." Jonas held the gun for 1 second longer. Then, slowly, agonizingly, he eased the hammer down. He holstered the gun. He reached down and grabbed Samuel by the throat, hauling him up to his knees. Samuel whimpered. The judge said, "Stay away." Jonas hissed, his face inches from Samuel's. "I am telling you something else. If I see you on my land, if I see you near her, I will not need a gun. I will tear you apart with my hands." He shoved Samuel back into the dust. Sheriff Miller pushed through the crowd. "All right, break it up. Get him out of here." 2 deputies grabbed Samuel, dragging him away toward the doctor's office. He was sobbing now, a broken, pathetic sound. Jonas stood in the street, breathing hard. He looked at his hands. They were shaking. The townspeople stared at him. They had known Jonas Hale was powerful. They had known he was rich. Now they knew he was dangerous. But as they looked from him to Emma, who was clinging to his arm, the look in their eyes changed. It was no longer just fear. It was respect. He had fought for her. He had almost killed for her. Crowther watched from the shadows of the courthouse porch. He lit a cigar, his face impassive. The brute force approach had failed. Samuel was a spent bullet. Crowther turned to his foreman. "Tell the boys at the bank to call in the note on Hale's feed loan," he said quietly. "And tell the cattle buyers in Cheyenne that Hale's herd has tick fever. If I cannot break his jaw," Crowther thought, watching Jonas help Emma into the wagon, "I will break his bank." The ride back to the ranch was silent. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a jagged exhaustion. The sky was turning a bruised purple as evening set in. When they arrived, the ranch hands were waiting. They saw the blood on Jonas's knuckles and the dark look in his eyes, and they quietly took the horses. Jonas went straight to the office. He poured a drink, his hands still trembling. Emma put Caleb to bed, sitting with him until his breathing evened out. When she came downstairs, Jonas was standing by the window, looking out at the darkness. "He will be back," Jonas said. "He cannot." Emma said, the judge is a fool." Jonas said. He turned to face her. "And Crowther is not done. I saw it in his eyes. He will use Samuel again, or he will find another way." He took a sip of whiskey, grimacing as it burned his throat. "There is only one way to stop this." "Emma." "What?" "Marry me." He said it like a command, like a tactical maneuver in a war. Emma froze in the doorway. "What? Marry me," Jonas repeated. He set the glass down. "If you are my wife, legally, Samuel has no claim. The law respects a husband. If you are Emma Hale, Crowther cannot touch you. The town cannot whisper. It puts a wall around you that they cannot breach." Emma felt a cold chill settle in her stomach. It was the same chill she had felt when he first asked her to stay. "Is that why you want to marry me?" Emma asked quietly. "To build a wall, to win a legal battle." "I want to protect you," Jonas said. He walked toward her, his hands open. "It is the only way to be sure. Emma, I can give you my name. I can give you the deed to the ranch if you want it. I can make you safe." "Safe," Emma repeated. She looked at him. She loved him. Her body still remembered the touch of his hands from the night before. But his words, they were practical. They were about possession and protection. They were not about partnership. "And what about me?" Emma asked. "What do I become? Do I become another asset to be managed? A problem to be solved with a contract?" "No," Jonas said, frustrated. "You become my wife." And then what? Emma's voice rose. Then I am yours, just like I was Samuel's? You say you want to protect me, Jonas, but you are asking me to sign away my freedom again. You are asking to own me so that another man cannot— I am not asking to own you, Jonas shouted. Why do you always twist it? I am offering you everything I have. I am offering to stand between you and the world. I do not want you to stand between me and the world, Emma shouted back. I want you to stand beside me. She paced the room, her skirt swishing angrily. I spent 7 years being protected. Jonas, Samuel protected me from having my own money. He protected me from having my own thoughts. He protected me right into a corner where I had to beg for my life. That is not fair, Jonas said, his voice low and dangerous. I am not him. I know you are not him, Emma cried. But the cage is the same shape. Jonas! She stopped, breathing hard. She looked at him, her eyes shining with tears. I want to choose you. Jonas, I want to be with you because I love you. Not because I'm afraid of Samuel, not because I need your name to be respectable. If I marry you now, out of fear, I will always wonder if I am just another stray you took in from the storm. Jonas looked at her. He looked defeated. The fight had drained out of him. He ran a hand over his face. I do not know how else to love you. Emma, he whispered, I only know how to hold on to things. I only know how to fight for them. Then learn. Emma whispered back. She walked to him. She placed her hands on his chest. Learn to let me stand on my own. Jonas, trust me enough to know that I will stay without a contract. Jonas covered her hands with his. He looked down at her, his eyes full of a raw, aching confusion. He was a man who built fences to keep things in. She was asking him to tear them down. I'm afraid, he admitted. His voice cracked. I am afraid that if I do not bind you to me, the wind will take you, like it took them. Emma leaned her forehead against his chest. I am not the wind. Jonas, I am right here. They stood there in the dim light, the argument hanging unresolved between them. They were at an impasse. He offered safety at the cost of freedom. She demanded freedom at the cost of safety. They were both right, and they were both wrong. Jonas kissed her forehead. It was a chaste, weary kiss. Go to bed, Emma, he said. We will talk tomorrow. Emma nodded. She pulled away, feeling the loss of his warmth immediately. She walked to the stairs, pausing at the bottom. Jonas? He looked up from his glass. I love you, she said. Jonas looked at her, his expression shattering. I know, he said. That is why I'm terrified. Emma went upstairs, leaving him alone with the ghosts and the whiskey. Outside, the wind began to pick up again, rattling the shutters. A reminder that the storm was never truly over. The legal battle was won, but the war for their future and for their hearts was just beginning. Crowther was out there. Samuel was out there. And in the silence of the ranch house, the biggest enemy was the fear that lived inside the two people who loved each other most. The air in the valley hung heavy and still, charged with a static electricity that made the hairs on the back of Jonas Hale's neck stand up. It was late afternoon, and the sky to the west was bruising a deep, violent purple. Towering thunderheads piled atop the peaks of the Bighorn Mountains, their bellies swollen with rain and hail. Jonas sat on his horse on a ridge overlooking the north pasture. The herd, usually placid this time of day, was restless. The cattle milled in tight circles, lowing nervously, tossing their heads. They smelled the storm. Yes, but Jonas knew cattle. This was not just weather nerves. This was the skittishness of prey that knew a predator was circling. Beside him, Luke shifted in his saddle, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. They are jumpy. Boss, Luke muttered. Too jumpy. Jonas narrowed his eyes, scanning the tree line and the distant mouth of the shadowy box canyon known as Devil's Throat. If the herd moved, that was where they would go. It was a narrow, rocky chute that would break legs and crush bodies if 2,000 head of cattle tried to funnel through it at speed. Keep the boys tight, Jonas ordered, his voice low. Double the perimeter. I want a rifle in every scabbard and eyes on every shadow. Crowther is quiet, Luke noted. Too quiet. That is what worries me. Jonas said. He tightened his grip on the reins, the leather creaking. A man like Crowther does not accept a public shaming. He waits. And Samuel is a cornered rat. Jonas turned his horse back toward the ranch house. He felt a pull in his chest, an invisible tether connecting him to the woman and the boy inside those walls. For months, he had told himself he was protecting them out of duty. Now, as the first rumble of thunder rolled across the plains, he admitted the truth. He was terrified. He was terrified because for the first time in 5 years, he had something to lose that mattered more than the land. Night fell like a hammer. The moon was a mere sliver of bone, offering no light, and the clouds swallowed the stars. The darkness was absolute. At the Bar C, Elias Crowther stood by a small fire, watching Samuel Price check the load in his revolver. Samuel looked different. The veneer of the repentant husband was gone. His eyes were hollow and feverish, burning with a mix of whiskey courage and desperate hate. "You know the plan," Crowther said softly. "My boys will start the music. When the herd runs, Hale will have to ride. He cannot afford to lose the beef. The house will be empty." Samuel holstered the gun. "And the boy?" "You take the boy," Crowther said. "You disappear. Without the heir, and with the cattle dead in the canyon. Hale is finished. He will be broken." Samuel climbed onto his horse. "I do not care about your cattle war. Crowther, I just want her to know who won." Crowther smiled in the dark. "Just get it done. At the Hale Ranch." Emma was pacing the kitchen. The windows rattled in their frames as the wind picked up, moaning around the eaves. She had bolted the doors as Jonas instructed, but the locks felt flimsy against the weight of the dread settling in her stomach. Caleb was sitting at the table, drawing on a slate. He looked up, sensing her fear. "Is Mr. Jonas coming in?" Caleb asked. "He is checking the cows," Emma said, forcing a smile. "The storm makes them nervous." A crack of thunder shook the house, but it was not thunder. It was the sharp, distinct crack of a rifle shot. Then another, and another. Emma froze. Outside, the world exploded. A deep rolling roar began in the earth, vibrating up through the floorboards of the house. It sounded like a freight train, or an earthquake. It was the sound of 3,000 hooves hitting the hard-packed ground in unison. Stampede. Emma heard the shout from the bunkhouse. She heard the frantic jingle of spurs and the yelling of men. Jonas and his crew were already in the saddle when the shots rang out. They saw the flashes of muzzle fire from the ridge. Crowther's men, firing into the air, driving the herd into a blind panic. "Ride," Jonas screamed, spurring his black gelding into the dark. Turn them before the canyon." The cowboys raced into the blackness, whooping and firing their own pistols, trying to create a wall of noise to steer the terrified beasts. It was dangerous, suicidal work, to ride at a full gallop in the dark, over gopher holes and rocks, alongside a wall of moving muscle that could crush a man to paste in seconds, required a madness born of necessity. Jonas rode hard, the wind tearing at his face. He could smell the ozone of the storm and the musk of fear from the cattle. He leaned out of the saddle, firing his Colt near the ear of the lead steer, trying to force the animal to turn. Back at the house, Emma grabbed Caleb's hand. "Come on," she said, her voice tight. "Where are we going?" Caleb asked, his voice trembling. "The cellar," Emma said. "It is safer." She dragged him toward the pantry where the trap door to the root cellar lay. She hauled the heavy wooden door open, the smell of damp earth and potatoes rising up. "Go down, Caleb. Go all the way to the back." Caleb scrambled down the ladder. Emma prepared to follow him, to pull the door shut over them. But she stopped. She heard a sound over the roar of the distant stampede. It was the sound of a heavy boot on the front porch. The front door was bolted. She knew it was bolted. She watched in horror as the heavy latch rattled. Then there was a deafening crash. A boot kicked the wood near the lock. Once, twice. The door splintered and flew open, banging against the wall. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted by a flash of lightning. The wind gusted in, extinguishing the candle on the mantel, leaving only the dim light of the kitchen lamp. The man stepped inside. shaking the rain from his coat. "Hello, girl. Samuel." He held a revolver in his hand. It looked huge in the small room. Emma stood by the pantry door. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it would crack the bone. She looked down into the dark hole where her son was hiding. "Stay down," she whispered. "Do not make a sound." She closed the trap door. She stood on top of it. Samuel walked into the kitchen. He looked wild, his hair plastered to his forehead, his eyes darting around the room. "Where is he?" Samuel rasped. "He is gone," Emma said. Her voice shook, but she stood her ground. "Jonas is with the herd. You know that. That is why you are here." "I mean the boy," Samuel shouted, waving the gun. "Where is my son? He is not here." Emma lied. "I sent him to town." "With Marta? Liar!" Samuel stepped closer. "He is here. I can smell the fear on you." He raised the gun, pointing it at her chest. "Move." "Emma, I am taking him. We are leaving." Emma looked at the gun. She looked at the man holding it. For 7 years, this man had been her God. He had controlled her world, her happiness, her safety. He had made her small. He had made her believe she was nothing without him. But as she stood there, with her son beneath her feet and the storm raging outside, something inside Emma Price snapped. The fear did not vanish, but it hardened. It turned into cold, heavy iron. "No," Emma said. Samuel blinked. "What did you say?" "I said no," Emma repeated. "You are not taking him. You are never touching him again." Samuel laughed, a high, jagged sound. "You think you can stop me? You are nothing. Emma, you are a weak, stupid girl who needs a man to tell her what to do. Now move, or I will shoot you and find him myself." "Shoot me then," Emma said. She took a step toward him. "Shoot me, Samuel, because that is the only way you are getting past me." Samuel hesitated. He had expected begging. He had expected tears. He did not know this woman. "You think I won't?" Samuel snarled. "I think you are a coward," Emma said, her voice rising, filling the room. "I think you are a small, pathetic man who has to hurt women to feel strong. You are not a father. You are a mistake we survived." "Shut up," Samuel screamed. His hand shook. "You are worthless. Samuel," Emma shouted. "And you know it. That is why you hate Jonas, because he is twice the man you will ever be." Samuel roared with inarticulate rage. He raised the gun, his finger tightening on the trigger. Outside, in the chaos of the stampede, Jonas had turned the lead steers. The herd was milling, slowing down. He pulled his heaving horse up, looking back toward the ranch. He saw the light in the kitchen window, and he saw a shadow move across it, a shadow that did not belong to Emma. "No," Jonas breathed. He spun his horse. He dug his spurs in. The black gelding, already exhausted, surged forward one last time. Jonas rode not for the cattle, but for his life. He rode with a prayer in his teeth. He hit the ranch yard at a dead run. He didn't bother with the reins. He bailed off the horse while it was still moving, hitting the mud and rolling. He scrambled up, slipping, falling, getting up again. He saw the open front door. He sprinted. He hit the doorway just as Samuel raised the gun. Jonas did not shout. He did not pause to aim. He launched himself across the kitchen like a missile. Samuel heard the boots on the floorboards. He turned, distracted for a fraction of a second. Jonas hit him. The impact drove Samuel back against the stove. The gun went off. The boom was deafening in the enclosed space. A jar of preserves on the shelf exploded, spraying glass and red syrup. Jonas and Samuel went down in a tangle of limbs. They rolled on the rough wooden floor, crashing into the table, overturning chairs. Samuel was fighting with the desperation of a rat. He clawed at Jonas's face, gouging for the eyes. Jonas grunted, a sound of pain. The bullet had found him. A searing heat burned in his left side, just above the hip, but he did not let go. He grabbed Samuel's wrist, slamming it against the floorboards, trying to jar the gun loose. Samuel bit Jonas's arm, snarling. He brought his knee up, catching Jonas in the wound. Jonas gasped, his grip loosening. Samuel bucked, throwing Jonas off. He scrambled to his knees, raising the gun again. Jonas was on the floor, clutching his side, blood seeping through his fingers. He tried to rise, but his leg gave way. "Die!" Samuel screamed, aiming at Jonas's chest. Emma moved. She did not think. She grabbed the first thing her hand touched on the stove. It was the heavy, cast-iron skillet, still warm from dinner. She swung it with both hands, putting every ounce of her fear, her rage, and her love into the blow. The iron struck the side of Samuel's head with a sickening, heavy thud. Samuel's eyes rolled back in his head. He collapsed instantly, crumpling to the floor like a puppet with cut strings. The gun clattered from his hand, sliding across the floor. Silence rushed back into the room, broken only by the sound of the rain drumming on the roof and the harsh, ragged breathing of the two people left conscious. "Jonas!" Emma dropped the skillet. She fell to her knees beside him. Jonas lay pale, his face gray in the lamplight. Blood was spreading dark and fast across his shirt. "I am all right," Jonas wheezed, trying to sit up. Is the boy safe? He is safe," Emma sobbed, pressing her hands against the wound. "He is safe. Oh God! Jonas, you are bleeding!" The sheriff burst in a moment later. He had heard the shot from the road where he had been following the stampede noise. He saw Samuel unconscious on the floor, the gun, and Emma pressing towels to Jonas's side. "Deputies!" Miller shouted. "Get in here!" They cuffed Samuel, dragging his limp body out into the rain. This time, there would be no bail. Attempted murder, trespassing, assault. Samuel Price was finished. Crowther would survive, as rich men often did, but his tool was broken, and his reputation would be tattered when the truth of the night's cowardly attack came out. But Emma did not care about Samuel. She did not care about Crowther. "Help me!" she screamed at Marta, who had rushed in from her room in her nightgown. "Get the bandages, get the whiskey." They lifted Jonas onto the kitchen table. The strong, invincible cattle baron looked terrifyingly mortal. He gripped Emma's hand, his strength fading. "Emma," he whispered. "Hush," Emma commanded, tears dripping off her chin onto his chest. "Do not you dare speak. Do not you dare leave me." "Jonas Hale, you promised." "I am not leaving," Jonas managed to say before his eyes fluttered closed. Emma worked. She became a creature of pure focus. She cleaned the wound, she packed it, she bound it tight, and all the while, she realized that the cage she had feared, the cage of dependency, of loving someone so much it destroyed you, was already built. She was in it, and she never wanted to leave. The days that followed were a blur of fever and rain. Jonas did not die. He was made of gristle and iron, and he refused to let a man like Samuel Price kill him. But the fever took him for 3 days. He burned hot, tossing in the bed, muttering names. Eleanor, Sarah, Emma. Emma did not leave his side. She slept in the chair. She sponged his forehead. She forced broth between his lips. The town changed its tune. The story of the night traveled fast. How Samuel had tried to kill them. How Jonas had ridden through a stampede to save them. How Emma had felled the attacker with a skillet to save Jonas. They stopped seeing a fallen woman. They started seeing a pioneer, a mother who fought, a woman who stood by her man. It was a crude, rough kind of respect, but it was respect nonetheless. Mrs. Sterling even sent a dried apple pie, though Emma suspected the crust was tough on purpose. On the 4th day, the fever broke. Jonas woke up. He was weak, but his eyes were clear. He looked around the room, seeing the sunlight streaming in, seeing Emma asleep in the chair, her hand resting near his on the coverlet. He watched her for a long time. Emma woke with a start. She saw him watching her. "You are back," she whispered. "I am back," Jonas rasped. Emma began to cry. Not the hysterical sobs of the attack, but the quiet, relieving tears of a burden put down. "We need to talk," Jonas said later, when he was sitting up, sipping tea. "About what?" Emma asked. "About us, about the marriage." Emma stiffened. Jonas saw it. He reached out and took her hand. "I was wrong," Jonas said. Emma looked at him. surprised. "I offered you a contract," Jonas said. "I offered you a wall, because I was scared. I thought if I locked you in, I could keep you safe, but I cannot keep you safe. Emma, the world is too big. The storms are too strong." He looked at the scar on his side. "Safety is a myth," he said. "There is only facing it." He squeezed her hand. "I do not want to own you. Emma, I do not want a housekeeper. I do not want a ward. I want a partner. I want someone who will swing a skillet when I am down. I want someone who will tell me when I am being an arrogant fool." He looked deep into her eyes. "I am asking you to stand beside me, not behind me, beside me, as an equal. Will you marry me, Emma? Not for the law, not for the town, but for me?" Emma looked at the man in the bed. She saw the scars of his past, and she saw the open door of his future. She realized that freedom was not about being alone. Freedom was choosing who you stood with in the storm. "I will," Emma said. She leaned down and kissed him. It was a kiss of promise, deep and true. "I choose you." Jonas Hale. The summer came late that year, but when it arrived, it was glorious. The rains had made the grass grow tall and golden. The creeks ran clear and cold. It was an evening in late August. The air was filled with the sound of crickets and the lowing of fat cattle. Emma stood on the porch of the ranch house. She was wearing a new dress, a pale yellow calico that matched the grass. She watched the road. Caleb was in the yard, helping Luke carry a bucket of feed. He was laughing, his fear of the wind gone, replaced by the confidence of a boy who knew he belonged. Jonas rode in on his black gelding. He moved a little stiffer than before. The side would always plague him in the rain, but he sat tall. He dismounted and handed the reins to a stable hand. He walked up the steps, dusting his hat against his leg. He stopped in front of Emma. He looked at her with a look that made her knees weak, even after months of marriage. He looked out at the valley, at the peace they had carved out of the chaos. Then he looked back at her, a playful glint in his gray eyes. "You still thinking of leaving?" he asked. It was their joke now, a reminder of the night she had knocked on his door. Emma smiled. She reached out and took his hand, interlacing her fingers with his. She felt the calluses, the strength, the warmth. "No," she replied softly. "I am exactly where I want to be." They stood there as the sun dipped below the mountains, casting long shadows across the wild, indifferent, beautiful land. They knew the winter would come again. They knew the drought would come. They knew the world would try to break them. But as Jonas put his arm around her and pulled her close, Emma knew one thing for certain. They would not break. Thank you for listening to this story of Emma and Jonas. It has been a journey through the storms and the sunshine of the American West. And I hope their story of resilience and love resonated with you. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Please leave a comment below and share your location. And if you enjoyed this tale, I encourage you to subscribe to From Wild West for more stories of the frontier. Please share your thoughts on the story in English. I read every comment and cherish your feedback. Until next time, keep your eyes on the horizon.